All right, thank you everybody for joining me today. Welcome to the webinar, Punctuation Quiz. And what we're going to do is we're going to review the punctuation guide. So this is going to be part one. I'm going to do two parts. So first of all, let's just go ahead. And what I want to do is I kind of want to review what it says at the top of your punctuation guide. I feel that maybe this information is very valuable, and maybe a lot of students don't realize that this information actually is written at the top of your punctuation guide. So please listen along. I haven't put it all onto slides, but I've just put the first little bit here onto the slide. So punctuation is an important part of the English language. It is used to provide structure to our words and phrases. Incorrect punctuation can have the potential to alter the intended meaning. So it is especially important to understand basic and necessary punctuation. Your training includes medical dictation in a variety of styles. Since you are transcribing verbatim, how you transcribe these different styles can be subjective. As an MT, this means that you must be flexible. What you see in one report may not be what you see in the next report. You will learn that there are many gray areas and more than one correct way to present information. This is especially true with punctuation. Differences between what is seen in keys and student submissions have resulted in students stressing over punctuation more than almost anything else, which is counterproductive. Rather than focusing mainly on punctuation, step back and think about what is most important in a report. Pay closer attention to the significant errors or higher point deductions in your reports. Note the feedback on your punctuation errors and work on decreasing these errors over time. So you probably, BT, can you please mute yourself? You've probably realized that we don't grade for all dictation, but we may, grade it and maybe leave a comment or a book of style and standards rule for you to look over. We are only scoring the most necessary punctuation, but you will continue to see differences in the keys, but these differences won't be deducted, like I just said. Just note them for future reference and move on. In part one of this two-part series, we will review the punctuation rules that you will be deducted for in your medical transcription program. So this first part, we're just going to concentrate on the punctuation rules that we deduct for. Okay, so moving on here. The first thing is items in a list. So use a comma between items in a list, including before the words and or, and that's outlined in Book of Style 3.4.2. Now let's look at an example, and here's the sentence. There is no history of dizziness, shortness of breath, or nausea. So that's as it's dictated. So I want you to take a look at these options underneath and select how you feel that should be transcribed. So let's just give everybody a chance to look over the options. Oh, somebody's unmuted. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Okay, if you want to type in your answer, go ahead. What do you think is the correct way to transcribe that sentence? Good. All right, let's take a look. The correct answer is C. So you see, we've put a comma between dizziness and shortness of breath, and also a comma before or, like mentioned in that Book of Style and Standards rule. Next one. So alongside of that, there is an exception to that, and that is do not use a comma if all of the items in the series are joined by and or. So let's look at our next example here. Same sentence, just a little bit different. There is no history of dizziness or shortness of breath or nausea. So that's how the dictator has dictated it. So take a look at the options, and we'll just hold off for a second to give everyone a chance to look at them. Okay, what do you think is the correct option for transcribing that sentence? This is perfect. We have some mixed answers, and this is great. So let's look at the correct answer. The correct answer is B, with no commas at all, because we have this little or dictated between each item in the list. So if or wasn't dictated, then definitely we would use the commas. But because or is dictated, we do not need the commas in a series with or and. Same rules apply for and. Okay, so the next item is commas before conjunctions. Use a comma to separate two independent clauses, and an independent clause is a statement that can stand on its own that are joined by a conjunction. So think fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, so, yet. Those are some of the conjunctions. Not all of them, but some of them. And it's a good, easy way to remember it is fanboys. And you can test this by removing the conjunction. So if you take the conjunction out, do you still have two complete sentences? And if you do, place a comma before the conjunction. So let's take a look at an example. So the sentence is, the patient was stabilized in the emergency department and he will be admitted for further testing and observation. So let's just give everybody a chance to review the options. Okay, let's take a look. And again, we have some mixed answers, and this is fantastic because this is a great educational opportunity. The patient was stabilized in the emergency department, comma, and he will be discharged, or pardon me, he will be admitted for further testing and observation. So remember when we said take out the conjunction, this is and, the conjunction, and if you have two complete sentences, you would have to use a comma. So let's look at it that way. The patient was stabilized in the emergency department. That's a complete sentence. He will be admitted for further testing and observation. That's another complete sentence. So now you have two complete sentences joined by a conjunction. Therefore, you need to add the comma before the conjunction. So there's a little bit of a rule here, kind of a gray area. Commas before conjunctions again. Do not use a comma if a verb follows the conjunction. And once again, BOS 3.4.3. So let's take a look at the example again. And this has just been changed a little bit. The patient was stabilized in the emergency department and will be admitted for further testing and observation. So let's give everybody a chance to look at the options before we enter in our answers. Okay, we have some answers coming in. And once again, this is awesome because we do have some differences in the answers. I love it because it's awesome to learn. Okay, let's reveal. The patient was stabilized in the emergency department and will be admitted for further testing and observation. No comma. And the reason for the no comma is because the verb follows the conjunction. So we do not have two complete sentences because the verb follows, so we do not add a comma. And like I said, 3.4.3, take a look in there. There's some information in there. There's some examples. All right. The next item is commas in complete dates. So use a comma to separate the day of the month from the year when the full date is expressed. And this is explained in BOSS 3.4.6. So let's take a look at an example here. Follow-up has been arranged for July 13th, 2024. So let's give everybody a moment to look at the answers and have a think about it. Okay, we have some answers coming in. Perfect. Let's take a look. The correct answer is A. We have that comma after the date before the year. That's awesome. Good job, you guys. So another part of that rule is when the full date, month, day, and year occurs in the middle of a sentence, use a comma to separate the year from the rest of the sentence. So BOSS 3.4.6 is where you'll find that information. And let's look at an example again. The patient was last seen on March 16, 2022 for a general physical exam. Let's give everybody a chance to think about the answers and review the options before we put in our answer, please. All right, some answers are starting to come in. This is great because once again, we do have, some variations of the answers. So let's take a look at the correct way to transcribe that. The patient was last seen on March 16, comma, this comma here is to follow the first part of that rule that we went over. 2022, comma, there's the full date with the year in the middle of a sentence, so we need to add a comma for a general physical exam. Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, let's take a look at our next one. Commas with more than 5 digits. So use a comma to separate groups of 3 numerals in numbers of 5 digits or more. The comma in 4-digit numbers is optional. So this is located in a couple different places, Book of Style and Standard 721 or 345. Let's take a look at an example to practice this rule. Blood work showed a platelet count of 345,000. So out of these two options, which do you think is the correct way to transcribe that number? Right on. That's right. We would have to put a comma in between. It's 6 digits, so we've grouped them in threes. If, for example, 45,000 was dictated, we put the commas in from the right-hand side. So we wouldn't put if it was only 45,000, we would not put the comma after the first zero. We have to put it after the 45. So, okay, let's look at the next. So here's another example. white count came back at 7,100. So out of these options, which do you think is the correct answer? Okay, let's reveal. The correct answer is C, both A and B. So we said earlier that in a 4-digit number, it is acceptable to use the comma or to leave it out. So because this has 4 digits, we can either add the comma or leave it out, and both ways are acceptable. So yeah, A and B are both acceptable. All right. Now, there is an exception to this rule, of course, because we have to have exceptions sometimes. So do not use the comma in numbers with 5 digits or more when the number includes a decimal. So if they were really, really exact in the value, say maybe they said 45,125.25, then we would not add the commas because that number would have a decimal in it. The next item that I want to talk about is run-on sentences. So we have to use a period between two complete sentences, and that to follow Book of Style and Standards 3.1.1. And a run-on sentence occurs when two or more complete sentences are joined by a comma, and this is also called a comma splice. So let's look at an example. The patient received his flu shot. He tolerated it well. So let's give everybody just a couple seconds here to look at the options for how that should be punctuated. And just get everyone a chance to look. Okay, we have some answers coming in. And once again, there's some variation. So this is great because it means I'm teaching you something. Okay, let's reveal the correct answer. The patient tolerated his flu shot well, period. Pardon me. The patient received his flu shot, period. He tolerated it well, period. So these are two complete sentences, so we need to put a period in between them. Okay. So next is terminal punctuation. The period is a terminal punctuation mark. It is used to create separation between one thought and the next. So BOSS 3.1. Let's look at an example. The patient will return to discuss her MRI results. She will call if her symptoms worsen before her MRI date. So this is kind of similar to the last rule that we just did, where it says we need to put a period between two complete sentences. And this is kind of similar to that one. So let's give everybody a chance to look at the options and then we'll discuss the answers, or the answer, pardon me. Hey, we have some answers coming in. Good job. Let's reveal the answers here. The patient will return to discuss her MRI results, period. She will call if her symptoms worsen before her MRI date. So two complete sentences, and we need to have a period in between them. So the next part of that, I just didn't want to just focus on the period because we do use other punctuation. A question mark is also considered terminal punctuation, an exclamation point as well. We don't often use exclamation points in medical transcription, but there might be a time when you do use one, just depending on maybe the doctor wants to drive his statement home and he might say exclamation point instead of period at the end of that sentence. So there are times when you might, but it's not very common. So question mark is BOSS 3.2. So let's take a look at an example. When did your symptoms begin? So which item do you think is the correct way to punctuate that sentence? That was an easy one, hey? B, when did your symptoms begin? Question mark. Perfect. That was an easy one. All right. So we also have punctuation that changes the meaning. So extra, omitted, or incorrectly placed punctuation that changes the meaning of the sentence. This is something that we want to be careful for in our reports, and I will show you an example of why you have to be careful because it can change the meaning. The sentence dictated is temperature was 100.4, rectal pulse was 88. So let's take a look at the options here first and let me know in a couple seconds here how you think those sentences should be divided. All right, go ahead. Let's put our answers in if you like. All right. Temperature was 100.4 rectal. Pulse was 88. So you can see how putting the period in the wrong place could change the meaning because if we put rectal in with the same sentence of the pulse, um, have you ever heard of a rectal pulse? It doesn't really make sense. So, but it does make sense that the temperature was taken rectally, whereas that's not how we generally measure the pulse. So you can see how incorrectly placed punctuation can change the meaning and kind of make somebody scratch their head. So next we have punctuation that goes against the account specifics. Some of these punctuation items that go against your account specifics are deducted as just punctuation errors, and some of them are deducted as protocol failure errors. It just depends on what what the rule is that you should have been following. So omitting the period after an assessed item in the assessment, impression, or diagnosis is one example. So let's take a look at an example here. Here we have impression as a heading, and it's a numbered list. Diabetes, he will begin metformin, hypertension under reasonable control. So that's what's dictated. So out of these two options, which do you think is the correct way to punctuate that expression or that impression, I should say? This is great because once again, we do have some differing answers. Okay, let's take a look. The correct answer is A. We put the period after the assessed item, which is diabetes. That's to follow the account specifics. And here we have a complete sentence. He will begin metformin. We need a period at the end of that sentence. Same thing with the hypertension. Okay. So another example of punctuation that goes against account specifics is a colon after a major heading. And I think you guys are going to get this one really quickly. So the same sentence is dictated, or the same impression is dictated. The two different examples, which one do you think is correct? And I'm expecting everybody to get this one right. That's right. No colon after major headings. That's right. So in this, if you put a colon after a major heading, that's an example of a punctuation error that's going to be deducted as a protocol failure. All right, let's look at our next item. Our next item is hyphens, specifically hyphens in compound modifiers. So that's Book of Style and Standards 3.8.2. Okay, let's take a look at an example. The patient presented with a 3-inch laceration on his left forearm. So take a look at the options for the correct punctuation of this sentence, and let's give everybody a chance to take a look before we enter our answers. Okay, so which option do you think is correct for that? Good. Let's take a look. The answer is B. Correct, you guys. The patient presented with a 3-inch laceration. So this is the compound modifier. Here's the noun to make it into a compound modifier. This is the 3-inch is modifying the noun laceration. So we hyphenate that. All right. Now, there is an exception to that, and we do not use a hyphen even if it fits into the compound modifier rule. But if it's a metric unit that's dictated, we do not use a hyphen. So let's test that. The patient presented with a 3-centimeter laceration on his left forearm. So what do you guys think is the correct way to punctuate that sentence? Yep, you got it. No hyphen between the 3 and the centimeter, because centimeters is a metric unit of measure, so we do not add the hyphen with metric units. Let's try this one. The patient indicated the pain was right-sided. Which option do you think is correct? Okay, this is great because actually, surprisingly, the correct answer is A. The patient indicated the pain was right-sided with no hyphen. And the reason for that is because this isn't a compound modifier. There's not a noun following it. So let's take a look at this one. Just a little bit different. The patient presented with right-sided pain. Now, which one do you think is correct in this example? There you go. That's right. B. The patient presented with right-sided pain. Right-sided is the compound modifier. Pain is the noun that it's modifying. Okay, let's move on. So more hyphens, and this one is talking about hyphens in ranges. So Book of Style and Standards 3.8.8. So let's take a look at an example here. The patient states his symptoms started 3 to 4 weeks ago. So that is how it is dictated. So take a look at the options for the answer and let me know in just a couple seconds which one you think is correct. That's right. The correct answer is C. The patient states his symptoms started 3 to 4 weeks ago. It's just a simple range, 3 to 4, so we would use the hyphen in between. Now, there are some exceptions to that where we would have to type out 2. And let's take a look. And that's in the BOSS. 8.6 is, there's a lot of examples and different rules for that. But let's take a look at some exceptions. So I see this one quite a lot. The study showed 50 to 55% of patients noticed no side effects. How do you think that should be punctuated? With a hyphen, or should we put the 2 in there? This is great because I'm teaching you something. The correct way to transcribe that would be to spell out 2. And the reason is one of the exceptions to using a hyphen in ranges that if um, any of the numbers includes a symbol, which is the percent, that's the symbol that we're talking about, we would have to write out 2 instead of using a hyphen. So yeah, definitely go in and look at BOSS 3.6.1 and, a few of the sections behind it for these exceptions to using a hyphen in a range. So let's talk about apostrophes next. Apostrophe with inanimate or regular possessive nouns, and that's Book of Style and Standards 5, 3, 10, and 5, 3, 1. Let's take a look at a couple examples. The patient will be seen in follow-up in 6 months' time is what's dictated. So looking at these 3 options, which way do you think you should punctuate that sentence? Good job, guys. And I love it because once again, there's some differences. So because 6 is more than 1, we have to use a plural possessive, which is putting the apostrophe after the S. If we put it before the S, that is a singular possessive. So the correct answer is C. 6 months with the apostrophe after the S because there's more than 1 month. So take a look at that. This one is 5, 3, 10. And there's some really great examples in the Book of Style and Standards for this one. Let's look at another one. The patient's review of systems was unremarkable, and we're going to assume that patients is not plural, it is one patient. Which way do you think that should be punctuated? You bet. It is A, apostrophe S. So, Virgo, this one is, there's a lot of information in and examples in the Book of Style and Standards about this. So we're going to talk about using Virgils in out of or over expressions, and that's Book of Style and Standards 3.12.3 and 8.6.3. The patient has a grade 1/4 murmur. So how do you think that should be formatted? Okay, once again, some mixed answers, so this is great. B is the correct way to format it, 1/4 murmur. So we use a Virgil when over is dictated. But once again, we do have some exceptions. Virgils and ranges, and once again, Book of Style and Standards 3.12.3 and 8.6.3. Here's an example of a range with an out of expression. So the out of expression, when we would also use a virgule if it was um, dictated. Like you can also use a virgule to indicate out of, is what I'm trying to say. The patient rated his pain as a 5 to 6 out of 10. Which do you think is the correct way to format that sentence? Good, good. The patient rated his pain as a 5 to 6 out of 10. So we have to spell it out. And the reason is because it's a range. This 5 to 6 is the range. So we have to spell out the out of. We cannot use a virgule in this instance. Here's another example. Pardon me. Using over instead of out of. Left lower extremity strength is 3 to 4 over 5. How do you think that should be formatted? Right on. Yep. A. We have to spell it out again because here's this range, 3 to 4 over 5. So we need to spell out the over and the 2 because it's a range. Okay. Fractions. Use hyphens to express a compound fraction or when spelling out a fraction. So Book of Style and Standards 3.8.7. Let's take a look at an example. The patient is currently at 37 and 3/7 weeks of gestation. So looking at these options, how do you think you would format that sentence? Good. Once again, we do have some differences in answers, and this is great because that means I'm teaching you guys something. The patient is currently at 37-3/7 weeks of gestation. So we need to put the hyphen in between compound fractions. Okay, let's look at another example. He has a hairline fracture of the fibula 3/4 of the way up from the lateral malleolus. How do you think that should be formatted? Yep, you guys are right. We need the hyphen between the fraction, even if it's spelled out. So 3/4 with a hyphen in between. Awesome. That's it. So what we've covered here today is the first part of the punctuation guide, which is um, punctuation that we do deduct for in your transcriptions. In the second part, which will be coming later this year, we'll go over the ones that we do not deduct for, and we'll kind of do the same thing with some examples and a kind of a built-in quiz. Thank you for joining me today, everyone. I really appreciate it. And I'm just going to stop the recording here.